The morning sun peeked through the worn curtains of Harold Jensen's bedroom window. At 78 years old, Harold woke up the same way he had for the past 50 years, at 5 a.m., with the roosters. But today was different. Today, he wouldn't be heading out to check on his wheat fields or fix the tractor that had been giving him trouble since last harvest. Harold sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to wake his wife Betty, who was still sleeping peacefully. He looked at her with a smile that carried 50 years of shared memories. Her birthday was coming up next week, her 75th, and for once in their modest life together, Harold wanted to give her something extraordinary. "You deserve the world, old girl," he whispered, gently touching her silver hair. Harold had noticed how Betty would linger on certain pages of those fancy magazines their granddaughter left behind after visits. One page in particular, a beautiful handbag that Betty said reminded her of one she'd seen in a movie when they were dating back in the 60s. Harold had been saving in secret, putting away small amounts from their pension checks and the little income the farm still brought in. After a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, Harold dressed in what Betty called his Sunday best, a plaid flannel shirt that was only slightly faded, his least worn pair of jeans and boots he'd polished. The night before, he even put on the belt with the silver buckle his father had given him decades ago. "Going somewhere fancy?" Betty asked, appearing in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Just into town to pick up some things," Harold replied, trying to sound casual. "Don't you worry about the chickens, I already fed them." Betty gave him a suspicious smile. "Harold Jensen, I've been married to you for 50 years. I know when you're up to something." Harold just grinned and kissed her on the cheek. "I'll be back for dinner." The drive from their small Idaho farm to Boise took nearly 2 hours. From there, Harold boarded a plane for the first time in 23 years. His arthritic hands clutched the small piece of paper where his granddaughter had written down all the information about his flight to Los Angeles. The plane ride made Harold nervous. The world had changed so much since he last flew. Everyone around him seemed glued to their phones and tablets, while he sat stiffly in his seat, declining the flight attendant's offer to show him how to use the entertainment system. "I've got plenty to look at right out that window, thank you," he told her with a polite nod. By mid-afternoon, Harold found himself standing on a busy sidewalk in Los Angeles, feeling as out of place as a scarecrow at a wedding. The city was louder than he remembered, faster somehow. People rushed past him without a glance, everyone in a hurry to get somewhere important. Harold pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper from his pocket and squinted at the address his granddaughter had written down: Rodeo Drive, the place where the rich folks shopped, the place where Betty's dream handbag waited. "Excuse me," he asked a young man passing by. "Could you point me toward Rodeo Drive?" The young man barely slowed down, gesturing vaguely up the street before continuing on his way. Harold sighed and started walking in that direction, his boots making solid sounds against the pavement, so different from the soft crunch of dirt paths back home. After asking 2 more people for directions, Harold finally turned onto the famous street. He'd seen it in movies, but nothing prepared him for the real thing. The sidewalks were spotlessly clean, the storefronts gleaming with displays that probably cost more than his entire farm. Well-dressed people strolled casually, carrying shopping bags with fancy logos. Harold felt the eyes of security guards follow him as he walked slowly past each store, looking for the right name. His flannel shirt and worn jeans stood out like a dandelion in a rose garden. He straightened his shoulders, reminding himself that his money was as good as anyone else's. When he finally found the store, Harold paused outside, taking a deep breath. Through the glass windows, he could see chandeliers hanging from high ceilings and people dressed like they were going to church on Easter Sunday. For a moment, he considered turning around, going back to the airport, and telling Betty he couldn't find what he was looking for. "Don't be a coward, Harold," he muttered to himself. "You didn't survive 50 years of droughts, floods, and everything in between to get scared off by some fancy light fixtures." With that, he pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. Store smelled like leather and something else, something expensive that Harold couldn't name. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. The few customers inside spoke in hushed tones, as if they were in a library instead of a store. Harold stood just inside the entrance, momentarily frozen. Everything in the store looked delicate and costly. He was suddenly very aware of his weathered hands, the permanent dirt under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove completely. Hands that had worked the land for over 60 years. A young woman approached him, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted very much that she could. "I'm looking for a handbag," Harold said, his voice coming out louder than he intended in the quiet space. "A special one for my wife." The woman's smile tightened. "I see. Did you have a specific style in mind?" Harold reached into his pocket and carefully unfolded a page torn from a magazine. He'd circled the bag Betty had admired, a simple but elegant design in soft brown leather. "This one," he said, holding out the crumpled page, "or something like it." The woman took the page between her fingertips as if it might contaminate her. "This is last season's collection," she said, handing it back. "We don't carry it anymore." Harold's heart sank. He'd come all this way, and the one thing he wanted to get for Betty wasn't even here. "But," the woman continued with a sigh that suggested she was doing him an enormous favor, "we have the new version. It's similar, but with some improvements." "Could I see it?" Harold asked, hope returning. The woman led him deeper into the store, past glass cases containing handbags displayed like museum pieces. Harold noticed the lack of price tags. His grandfather had taught him long ago. If you have to ask the price, you probably can't afford it. But he'd saved enough, nearly $5,000, which had to be enough for a single handbag no matter how fancy. They stopped at a display where several bags sat on illuminated shelves. The woman pointed to one that resembled the bag from the magazine, though Harold noticed the leather looked softer, and there were small gold accents that the original didn't have. "May I?" he asked, reaching toward it. The woman hesitated before nodding. Harold picked up the bag carefully, turning it over in his hands. The leather was buttery soft, unlike anything he'd felt before. He thought of Betty, imagined her face when she opened it, how she'd protest that it was too much but would treasure it anyway. "My Betty and I have been married 50 years next month," Harold said, more to himself than the saleswoman. "She's never asked for much. Always made do with what we had." The woman didn't respond, and when Harold looked up, he noticed she seemed uncomfortable, glancing around as if hoping someone would rescue her. "How much is it?" Harold asked, deciding to get to the point. The woman cleared her throat. "This piece is $8,500. Harold blinked, sure he'd misheard. "Excuse me? $8,500, she repeated, enunciating each word clearly. Harold carefully set the bag back on its display shelf. That was nearly twice what he'd saved. For a moment, he felt foolish for thinking he could just walk in here and buy something like this. But then he thought of Betty. Betty, who had stood by him through the hard years when the farm barely produced enough to keep them afloat. Betty, who had worked alongside him in the fields when they couldn't afford to hire help. Betty, who had never complained when they had to patch and mend instead of buying new. "Do you have anything similar that's less?" he asked, the word feeling bitter in his mouth. The woman's expression shifted subtly, the politeness becoming even more strained. "We do have some smaller pieces in the back," she said. "They start around $3,000. Hope flickered again in Harold's chest. That was within his budget. It might not be exactly what Betty had admired, but it would be from the same fancy store, made with the same care. "I'd like to see those, please," he said. As the woman turned to lead him to another section, Harold noticed other customers watching them. He stood a little straighter, trying not to feel like an intruder. He belonged here as much as anyone else, he told himself. His money was as good as theirs. Little did Harold know that among those watching him was someone who understood exactly what it meant to feel out of place. Someone who was about to change the course of his day in ways he couldn't imagine. For now, though, Harold simply followed the saleswoman, thinking of Betty and the surprise that awaited her, unaware that his simple errand was about to become something much more complex. The saleswoman led Harold to a small display case near the back of the store. Compared to the grand showcases up front, this area felt almost hidden, as if these were items the store wasn't particularly proud to sell. "These are our entry-level pieces," she said, opening the glass case and taking out a small purse that looked nothing like the one Betty had admired. It was about half the size and made of a different material that even Harold could tell wasn't the same quality leather. "This one is $2,950, she said, barely holding it out for him to see. Harold frowned. "It's not really what I had in mind. Do you have anything more like the one I showed you? My wife, she's had her heart set on something like that for years." The saleswoman sighed, not bothering to hide her irritation anymore. "Sir, the bags in that style start at the price I already told you. Perhaps you might want to try the department store down the street. They have some reasonable imitations." The way she said reasonable made it clear she meant cheap. Harold felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck, but he wasn't ready to give up. "I'd still like to look at the original bag again if you don't mind," he said firmly. "Maybe I can figure something out." The saleswoman's tight smile disappeared completely. "Sir, these bags are investment pieces. They're not meant for everyone." She glanced pointedly at his worn boots and calloused hands. "Perhaps your wife would appreciate something more practical." Before Harold could respond, a tall man in an expensive suit approached them. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and a small pin on his lapel indicated he was the store manager. "Is everything all right, Miss Chen?" the man asked, though his eyes were fixed on Harold. "Mr. Donovan, this gentleman is interested in the Marquis collection, but I was just explaining our price points," she said with a meaningful look. The manager's expression changed instantly, a practiced smile appearing on his face. "I see. Sir, perhaps I can help you find something more suitable for your needs." Harold straightened his back. At his full height, he was still an inch or two taller than the manager, though age had begun to bend his spine. "I'd like to see the brown leather bag again, the one similar to this." He held up the magazine clipping once more. The manager barely glanced at it. "Of course, though I should mention that particular piece is quite exclusive. We typically reserve it for our regular clients." Harold knew what that meant. The bag wasn't being kept for anyone. They just didn't want someone like him buying it. "I've got cash," Harold said, patting his pocket where an envelope held $5,100 bills, his and Betty's savings from the past 3 years. "I can pay for whatever I decide to buy." The manager and saleswoman exchanged glances. "Very well," the manager said after a moment. "Ms. Chen, please show him the Marquis again." They returned to the main display area where the beautiful brown bag sat. Harold reached for it, wanting to feel the leather again, to imagine Betty's face when she opened it. "Sir," the manager said sharply, "please don't touch the merchandise without assistance." Harold pulled his hand back as if burned. A couple browsing nearby turned to stare, and he felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. "I just wanted to see it again," Harold explained, his voice quieter now. "Of course," the manager said with exaggerated patience. He slipped on a pair of white cotton gloves from his pocket and carefully lifted the bag. "The Marquis features hand-stitched Italian leather with our signature gold-plated hardware. The interior is lined with suede, and there are 3 separate compartments for organization." As he spoke, he held the bag just far enough away that Harold couldn't quite reach it. "It's beautiful," Harold said. "My Betty would love it. It's also $8,500, as Ms. Chen mentioned," the manager added. "Plus tax, of course." Harold swallowed hard. "Do you ever have sales?" The manager's smile became strained. "This isn't a discount store, sir. Our pieces are priced according to their craftsmanship and exclusivity." Harold nodded slowly. "I understand. And the smaller ones you mentioned, could I see those again?" The manager's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sir, I don't mean to be rude, but we have clients waiting who are serious about making purchases today. Perhaps you could come back when you've considered your budget more carefully. Harold felt something harden inside him. All his life, he'd worked hard and treated people with respect. He'd raised 3 children, sent them all to college, survived droughts that nearly took his farm, and never once asked for handouts. And now this man was treating him like he was wasting everyone's time. "I am serious," Harold said, his voice stronger now. "I came all the way from Idaho to buy my wife a special gift for her 75th birthday. We've been married 50 years and I want to get her something nice." "Idaho," the manager repeated with a small smirk, as if that explained everything. How quaint. A few customers nearby were watching the exchange now, some with uncomfortable expressions, others with barely concealed amusement. Harold felt like he was back in high school, the farm boy being mocked by the rich town kids. "Look," Harold said, reaching into his pocket. "I've got $5,000 right here. That's enough for one of your bags." "Sir, please don't," the manager began, but Harold had already pulled out the envelope of cash. "See? I can pay," Harold insisted, opening the envelope to show the stack of bills inside. The manager's expression changed to one of alarm. "Sir, please put that away immediately. We don't handle cash transactions of that size, and you shouldn't be displaying that amount of money in public." Harold started to return the envelope to his pocket, feeling foolish. As he did, the manager reached out suddenly and slapped his hand, causing some of the bills to spill onto the polished floor. The slap wasn't particularly hard, but it was shocking. The kind of thing you might do to a child reaching for something dangerous. Harold stumbled backward, more from surprise than force, knocking into a small display table. A delicate glass paperweight wobbled precariously. "Careful," the manager snapped, lunging forward to steady the table before the paperweight could fall. "That's a $200 crystal piece." The store had gone completely silent. Everyone was staring now. Harold bent down slowly, his knees protesting, to gather the fallen money. No one moved to help him. "I think you should leave," the manager said coldly once Harold had collected the bills. "Before you damage something you can't afford to replace." Harold felt a lump forming in his throat. He hadn't felt this humiliated since he was a boy. His cheeks burned and his hand stung slightly where it had been slapped. "I was just trying to buy a gift for my wife," he said quietly, tucking the envelope back into his pocket. "And I'm just trying to run a business for clients who appreciate fine things," the manager replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual customers to attend to." He turned his back on Harold and walked toward the couple who had been watching the scene unfold. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, so lovely to see you again. How was your trip to the Maldives?" Harold stood there, feeling invisible. The saleswoman wouldn't meet his eyes. A security guard had appeared seemingly from nowhere and was watching him closely. The message was clear. He didn't belong here. With as much dignity as he could muster, Harold turned to leave. He'd have to find something else for Betty. Something from a store where people like him were welcome. Maybe this had been a foolish idea from the start. Who was he kidding, thinking he could shop at a place like this? He had almost reached the door when a voice spoke up from nearby. "Excuse me, but I saw what happened." Harold turned to see a man with shoulder-length dark hair and a scruffy beard standing a few feet away. He was dressed simply in jeans and a black t-shirt, but somehow he looked like he belonged in the fancy store more than Harold did. "It's fine," Harold mumbled, embarrassed that someone had witnessed his humiliation. "I was just leaving." "No, it's not fine," the man said, his voice quiet but firm. There was something familiar about him, though Harold couldn't quite place it. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not when you're trying to do something kind for someone you love. The man smiled, and suddenly Harold realized why he looked familiar. He'd seen this face before, in movies, on TV, on the covers of magazines, in the grocery store checkout line. It was Keanu Reeves, and he didn't look happy with what he had just witnessed. For a moment, Harold thought he must be mistaken. Why would a famous movie star care about an old farmer being kicked out of a fancy store? But there was no mistake. Keanu Reeves was standing right in front of him, looking concerned and a little angry. "I'm fine, really," Harold said, embarrassed that his voice sounded a bit shaky. "Don't worry yourself over it." Keanu shook his head. It's not right. Nobody should be treated that way. He looked over at the manager, who was still chatting with the wealthy couple, but kept glancing nervously in their direction. Give me just a minute, okay? Before Harold could protest, Keanu walked directly toward the manager. Harold couldn't hear what was being said, but he saw the manager's face change from annoyance to shock as he realized who was addressing him. The Patterson couple looked equally startled, the woman's mouth dropping open slightly. Harold considered simply leaving while everyone was distracted. This whole trip had been a mistake. He should go back to Idaho, back to the farm, back to where things made sense. But something made him stay put, watching as Keanu spoke quietly but firmly to the manager, occasionally gesturing toward Harold. The store had grown eerily quiet. Even the soft background music seemed to have paused. Everyone was watching the exchange between the actor and the manager, who was now nodding repeatedly, his face pale. After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a minute, Keanu returned to Harold's side, followed by the manager, who looked like he'd just swallowed something sour. "Mr. Jensen," the manager said, forcing politeness into his voice, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We would be honored to help you select the perfect gift for your wife." Harold looked from the manager to Keanu, confused by the sudden change. "Mr. Donovan here was just explaining to me how the store values all its customers," Keanu said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Especially those who've traveled so far to shop here." The manager nodded quickly. "Absolutely. Customer service is our highest priority." Harold wasn't born yesterday. He knew what was happening. The manager was only being nice because Keanu Reeves had called him out. But Harold also knew when to accept a peace offering, even if it wasn't entirely genuine. "Well," Harold said slowly, "I did come all this way to find something special for my Betty." "Excellent," the manager said, his fake smile firmly in place. "Perhaps you'd like to see our full Marquise collection. We have several options that might interest you." "I think that would be nice," Harold agreed, glancing at Keanu with a small nod of thanks. The manager turned to the saleswoman who had been hovering nearby. "Ms. Chen, please bring out the full range of Marquis bags, including the limited editions." She hurried away, clearly relieved to escape the tension. "While we're waiting," Keanu said casually, "maybe you could explain to Mr. Jensen why you slapped his hand earlier. I'm sure there's a store policy about physically touching customers that I'd be interested to hear." The manager's smile faltered. That was a regrettable incident. I was concerned about the display piece potentially being damaged, and I reacted instinctively. It was unprofessional, and I apologize sincerely." He turned to Harold. "Sir, please accept my deepest apologies." Harold nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In 60 years of working, no one had ever slapped his hand like he was a misbehaving child. Keanu seemed to sense Harold's discomfort. "You know, I grew up without much money," he said, changing the subject slightly. "My mother worked really hard to support us, but luxury stores weren't exactly part of our regular shopping routine." The manager shifted uncomfortably as Ms. Chen returned with several bags on a velvet tray. "If you'll excuse me," the manager said, "I have some urgent calls to make. Ms. Chen will assist you with anything you need. Again, Mr. Jensen, my sincere apologies for the misunderstanding." With that, he retreated to a back office, walking so quickly he was almost running. Ms. Chen placed the tray on a nearby counter, her demeanor completely transformed from earlier. "These are all from our Marquis line," she explained, now treating Harold with exaggerated respect. "The one you were interested in is here, along with some similar styles." Harold looked at the bags, but felt a sinking feeling. The humiliation of the past half hour had taken the joy out of the shopping experience. He wasn't sure he wanted to give Betty something from a place where he'd been treated so poorly. Keanu seemed to read his thoughts. "You know," he said quietly, "gifts are important, but the story behind them matters too." "What were you hoping? To tell your wife with this gift?" Harold thought for a moment. "I wanted to tell her that she deserves beautiful things. That all those years of scrimping and saving, all those hard times we weathered together, it was worth it." That I notice how she looks at these fancy things but never asks for them. Keanu nodded. That's a beautiful message. But maybe it's not about this specific store or this specific bag. It's about what it represents, your appreciation for her. Harold looked at the bags again, feeling torn. The truth is, I saved up $5,000. That was supposed to be enough. I never imagined a handbag could cost more than a used truck. Keanu chuckled. The prices in these places are pretty crazy, right? He picked up the bag Harold had originally been interested in, the $8,500 one. Tell me about your wife. What's she like? Harold's face softened. Betty's the strongest woman I've ever known. We met in high school. She was the smartest. Girl in class, could have gone anywhere, done anything. But she chose me and the farm life. Never complained even when things got tough. He paused, lost in memories. She worked alongside me in the fields when we couldn't afford help, raised our kids, kept the books for the farm. And somehow she always managed to look nice, even on our budget. Ms. Chen, who had been pretending not to listen, looked genuinely moved by Harold's words. She sounds amazing, Keanu said. Someone that special deserves something special. He looked at the bag in his hands, then back at Harold. Would you mind if I contributed to Betty's gift? I'd consider it an honor. Harold blinked in surprise. What? No, I couldn't accept that. It's very kind, but please, Keanu insisted. Think of it as my way of celebrating your 50 years together. That's an incredible achievement, and it deserves recognition. But you don't even know us, Harold protested. I know enough, Keanu said simply. I know you flew all the way from Idaho to find the perfect gift for your wife. I know you saved for years to make her happy. And I know what it's like to have someone believe in you when nobody else does. He paused. Sometimes strangers can be part of our story in unexpected ways. Harold felt a lump in his throat. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Keanu suggested with a warm smile, and then tell me which bag you think Betty would like best. Harold looked at the collection again, this time allowing himself to really see them. He pointed to the original one he'd been drawn to, the simple but elegant design in soft brown leather. That one. It's just like the one she saw in a magazine. Excellent choice, Keanu said. He turned to Ms. Chen. We'll take this one. The saleswoman nodded eagerly. Of course, Mr. Reeves. Would you like it gift-wrapped? The works, Keanu confirmed. The nicest wrapping you have. As Ms. Chen carefully packaged the bag, other customers in the store began to realize who was standing among them. Whispers spread, and a few people took discreet photos with their phones. But Keanu seemed focused only on Harold and the gift for Betty. Tell me about your farm, he said as they waited. I've always respected people who work the land. Harold found himself talking about his wheat fields, the challenges of modern farming, and the satisfaction of watching things grow. Keanu listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. By the time Ms. Chen returned with the beautifully wrapped package, Harold felt like he was talking to an old friend, not a movie star. Here you are, sir, she said, handing the bag to Harold with a reverence that was comically different from her earlier attitude. Is there anything else we can help you with today? Harold shook his head. No, this is perfect, thank you. She nodded and retreated, clearly still nervous about the earlier incident. Harold turned to Keanu. I don't know how to thank you properly. This is more than just a gift for Betty, he struggled to find the words. It's about dignity, Keanu finished for him. And that's something everyone deserves, regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they have. Harold nodded, suddenly feeling emotional. I won't forget this. Betty's going to be over the moon when I tell her who helped pick out her gift. Keanu smiled. Maybe don't mention the part where I helped pay for it. Just tell her you found exactly what you were looking for. But I should at least tell her I met you, Harold insisted. How about this, Keanu suggested. Tell her after she's had a chance to appreciate the gift for what it is. Something from her husband of 50 years. That's the important part of this story, not me. Harold considered this and then nodded. You're a wise man, Mr. Reeves. Just, Keanu, please, and I'm not wise. Just lucky enough to have had some good teachers in my life. He glanced at his watch. I should get going. It was truly an honor to meet you, Harold. As they walked toward the door together, Harold noticed the manager watching nervously from his office. The other customers were still stealing glances there. Just before they reached the exit, Keanu turned to Harold. You know, the best revenge against people who judge you by your appearance is to live well and be happy. Something tells me you and Betty have that figured out better than most people in this store. Harold smiled. 50 years teaches you what matters, and it's not fancy stores or expensive things. What is it then? Keanu asked. Having someone to share your life with, Harold replied simply. Someone who sees you for who you really are. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. I think you're the wise one, Harold. Betty is a lucky woman, and with that, they stepped out into the California sunshine, an unlikely pair bound by a moment of kindness that neither would soon forget. Outside the store, the busy street seemed different to Harold now. The intimidating glamour of Rodeo Drive had faded somewhat. People hurried past, some giving curious glances at Keanu but most lost in their own worlds. Can I give you a ride somewhere? Keanu asked, nodding toward a simple black motorcycle parked nearby. Harold chuckled and patted the elegantly wrapped package. I appreciate the offer, but I think Betty's gift might not survive that journey. Besides, I should probably start heading back to the airport. At least let me call you a car, Keanu insisted. It's the least I can do. Before Harold could protest, Keanu had pulled out his phone and arranged for a car service. It'll be here in 5 minutes. The driver will take you wherever you need to go. Harold felt overwhelmed by the kindness of this man who owed him nothing. I don't know how to thank you properly. Not just for the gift, but for seeing me. Really seeing me. Keanu looked slightly embarrassed by the gratitude. You know, I've been in this business a long time. I've met people with everything money can buy who are miserable. And I've met people with very little who are rich in ways that matter. You remind me of my grandfather. He had this quiet dignity about him that no amount of money could buy. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the back door. That's your ride, Keanu said. The driver has instructions to take you wherever you need to go. Harold hesitated, then held out his hand. I wish Betty could meet you. She always says you can tell everything important about a person by their handshake. Keanu smiled and shook Harold's hand firmly. Maybe our paths will cross again someday. Stranger things have happened. If you're ever in Idaho and need a place to stay, our farmhouse isn't fancy, but the spare bedroom is always ready for guests, Harold said, knowing it was unlikely but wanting to extend the offer anyway. I might take you up on that, Keanu replied, and somehow Harold believed he meant it. With a final goodbye, Harold settled into the back seat of the car, carefully placing Betty's gift beside him. As the car pulled away, he looked back to see Keanu giving him a small wave before turning to walk down the street, his head down as if trying not to attract attention. The driver glanced at Harold in the rearview mirror. Where to, sir? LAX. Airport, please, Harold replied, still trying to process everything that had happened. As the car navigated through Los Angeles traffic, Harold couldn't stop thinking about the day's events. He had come to buy a simple gift and ended up in a situation that felt like something from a movie. And then an actual movie star had stepped in and changed everything. Harold's phone buzzed with a text from Betty. Hope you're having a good day in town. Don't forget to pick up milk on your way home. He smiled, imagining her face when he told her he'd gone a bit farther than town. Betty thought he was just in Boise for the day. The surprise would be even bigger than he'd planned. At the airport, the driver insisted on helping Harold inside with his package, explaining that Mr. Reeves was very clear about making sure you get where you need to go safely. The flight back to Boise felt shorter somehow. Harold kept the gift bag carefully on his lap the whole time, occasionally touching it to make sure it was real. An elderly woman sitting next to him noticed his careful handling. Must be something special, she commented with a smile. It's for my wife, Harold replied. We've been married 50 years next month. The woman's eyes widened. 50 years. Now that's something worth celebrating. My George and I made it to 42 before he passed. I'm sorry for your loss, Harold said. The woman patted his hand. Thank you, dear. But we had good years. That's what matters in the end, isn't it? The good years. Harold nodded. It sure is. By the time Harold's truck pulled into the long driveway leading to their farmhouse, the sun was setting, painting the wheat fields gold. The familiar sight of home brought a lump to his throat. After the chaos and glitter of Los Angeles, the simple beauty of his farm felt like a balm to his soul. Betty was standing on the porch, arms crossed, a mix of worry and annoyance on her face. Harold Jensen, where on earth have you been all day? I've been calling and calling. Harold realized with a start that he'd forgotten to turn his phone back on after the flight. I'm sorry, Bets. I got a bit sidetracked. Her expression softened as she noticed how tired he looked. Well, you're home now. That's what matters. Did you at least remember the milk? Harold burst out laughing. After everything that had happened, the humiliation at the store, meeting Keanu Reeves, flying, across the country and back in a day, Betty was worried about milk. What's so funny? She demanded, but her eyes were twinkling. Nothing, he said, still chuckling as he climbed out of the truck, carefully holding the gift bag behind his back. And no, I forgot the milk. Of course you did, Betty sighed, but she was smiling now. What's that you're hiding? Harold took a deep breath. I got you something. An early birthday present. Betty's eyebrows shot up. My birthday's not for 2 weeks. I know, but I couldn't wait. He brought the package around and held it out to her. Happy birthday, Betty. She looked at the elegantly wrapped package with its fancy logo and ribbon, then back at Harold with confusion. Harold, where did you get this? Open it first, he urged. Then I'll tell you the whole story. Betty carefully took the package and led the way inside. Their old farmhouse was nothing like the luxury store. Worn furniture, faded curtains, shelves lined with photos of their children and grandchildren, but it was home. She sat at the kitchen table and slowly, methodically unwrapped the gift, saving the ribbon and paper as she always did. When she finally opened the box and saw the leather handbag nestled in tissue paper, her hand flew to her mouth. Harold, she whispered, this is the bag from that magazine, the one I showed you months ago. She looked up at him, eyes wide. How did you remember? And how on earth did you afford it? Harold sat beside her, taking her hand in his. I've been saving up, a little bit here and there. I wanted to get you something special, something that wasn't practical for once. Betty carefully lifted the bag from its box, running her fingers over the soft leather. It's beautiful. More beautiful than it looked in the magazine. Her eyes filled with tears. But Harold, this must have cost a fortune. We can't afford things like this. Don't you worry about that, Harold said firmly. You deserve beautiful things, Betty. After 50 years of making do, of stretching every dollar, of putting everyone else first, you deserve something just because it's beautiful and you wanted it. A tear slipped down Betty's cheek. You went all the way to Boise for this? Harold cleared his throat. Not exactly. I went to Los Angeles. Los Angeles? Betty gasped. California? Today? Harold nodded. I took a plane this morning. That store, the one from the magazine, it's on a street called Rodeo Drive. Betty stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You got on a plane? You hate flying? I do, Harold admitted. But I love you more. Betty shook her head in wonder. I can't believe you did that for me. She looked down at the bag again. Tell me everything. What was the store like? Were the people nice? Harold hesitated. He didn't want to spoil the moment with the ugly parts of his day. The store was fancy, very fancy, and the people, well, they were interesting. Something in his tone made Betty look up sharply. Harold, what happened? He sighed. Betty had always been able to read him like a book. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Some of the folks there weren't too pleased about a farmer from Idaho shopping in their fancy store. Betty's expression hardened. What did they do? Slowly, Harold told her everything. How the saleswoman had treated him, how the manager had humiliated him, and then, finally, how Keanu Reeves had stepped in. Keanu Reeves? Betty repeated incredulously. The actor? From those action movies our grandson loves? Harold nodded. The very same. He was there, saw what happened, and he stood up for me. Made them apologize. Betty was silent for a long moment, processing it all. Then she carefully placed the bag back in its box. Take it back, she said quietly. What? Why? Harold asked, confused. I don't want something from people who treated you like that, Betty said firmly. No handbag is worth you being humiliated. Harold reached across the table and took her hands. Betty, listen. What happened in that store, the bad parts, they don't matter. What matters is what came after. A stranger saw someone being treated poorly and decided to help. He reminded me that there are good people in this world, even in places where you least expect to find them. Betty's expression softened slightly. Still, and besides, Harold continued, Keanu specifically told me to make sure you got to enjoy this gift without it being overshadowed by the drama. He said what matters is that it's from your husband of 50 years, not how it came to be. A small smile tugged at Betty's lips. He sounds wise for a movie star. He is, Harold agreed. He's a good man. Betty looked down at the bag again, running, her fingers over it thoughtfully. 50 years, she mused. We've been through so much together. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, Harold said. Betty's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling now. You know what? I think I will keep it. Not because it's fancy or expensive, but because my husband crossed the country and back in a day to get it for me. That makes it the most precious thing I own. She stood up and came around the table, wrapping her arms around Harold's shoulders. Thank you, she whispered against his hair. Not for the bag, but for 50 years of putting us first. Harold held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Happy birthday, Betty. Outside their window, the last light of day faded from the wheat fields and the first stars began to appear in the Idaho sky. The glamour of Rodeo Drive seemed a million miles away, and Harold wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months had passed since Harold's adventure in Los Angeles. The story had become a favorite among their friends and family, growing slightly more elaborate with each telling. Their grandchildren were particularly impressed by the Keanu Reeves part, though their youngest grandson remained convinced that Grandpa was making that part up. I'm telling you, he was right there, Harold would insist. Tall fellow, long dark hair, beard, very polite. Betty would just smile and shake her head, though she'd come to treasure the leather handbag. She used it only for special occasions, church on Sundays, their monthly dinner at the nice restaurant in Boise, and visits to their children's homes. The rest of the time it sat proudly on their dresser, a reminder of their 50 years together and Harold's grand gesture. One crisp autumn morning, as Harold was fixing the tractor in the barn, he heard Betty calling from the house. Her voice had an unusual edge to it. Harold! Harold, come quick! He dropped his wrench and hurried as fast as his creaky knees would allow, worry creasing his brow. Betty rarely raised her voice like that. He found her in the living room, standing in front of their old television set, remote control clutched tightly in her hand. What's wrong? He asked, slightly out of breath. Look, she said, pointing at the screen. Just look. Harold squinted at the TV. It was some entertainment news program, the kind Betty occasionally watched while folding laundry. On screen was a familiar face, Keanu Reeves sitting in an interview chair, smiling that same warm smile Harold remembered. And that's when I met this incredible gentleman from Idaho, Keanu was saying. He'd flown all the way to LA to buy his wife a special gift for their 50th anniversary. Harold's mouth fell open. He's talking about me. Betty nodded, her eyes wide. Keep listening. The way he was treated in that store, Keanu continued, shaking his head. It really bothered me. Here was this man who'd spent his life working hard, raising a family, being a good husband, and they judged him because he was wearing work boots and a flannel shirt. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. So what did you do? I stepped in, but honestly, he was the one who taught me something that day, Keanu replied. He had this quiet dignity about him. When I asked what he wanted his wife to know with this gift, his answer was so beautiful. He wanted her to know that after 50 years together, she deserved beautiful things. That all their years of hard work and sacrifice were worth it. Betty's eyes filled with tears. She reached for Harold's hand. I never told him that part, Harold whispered. I never told you I said that to him. You didn't have to, Betty said softly. I already knew. On screen, the interviewer was asking Keanu about his new movie, but the segment about Harold had clearly ended. Betty muted the TV. Can you believe it? She asked. You're famous now. Harold chuckled. Hardly. He didn't even use my name. Still, that's our story. On national television. Betty's expression suddenly changed. Oh my goodness, Harold. Do you think anyone will recognize us? What if people start showing up at the farm? Harold patted her hand. Don't worry. Like I said, he didn't mention our names or where in Idaho we live. It'll be fine. But it wasn't entirely fine. By that afternoon, their phone was ringing off the hook. Apparently, their granddaughter had seen the interview and posted on something called Twitter about how her grandfather was the Idaho farmer Keanu Reeves was talking about. Soon their children were calling, then friends of friends. Dad, you're trending, their youngest daughter exclaimed over the phone. There's a hashtag and everything. Harold wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but from Betty's concerned expression as she listened on the extension, it wasn't necessarily a good thing. The next morning, a van from a local news station arrived at their farm. A young reporter with bright eyes and an eager smile asked if they could interview the couple who befriended Keanu Reeves. Harold was inclined to send them away, but Betty surprised him. Maybe we should talk to them, she said quietly. Set the record straight. Your granddaughter's post makes it sound like you and Keanu are best friends now. Harold sighed. Betty was right, as usual. All right, he told the reporter, but we do this outside and we're not making a big fuss about it. The interview was brief and straightforward. Harold told the simple truth. He'd been treated poorly at a store. Keanu had witnessed it and stepped in. They'd had a nice conversation, and that was that. No, they hadn't stayed in touch. No, Keanu hadn't visited the farm. Yes, it was a kind thing he did, but the real story was about a husband trying to do something special for his wife of 50 years. I'm not the story here, Harold insisted to the reporter. My wife Betty is. 50 years she's put up with me through thick and thin. That's the remarkable thing. The reporter seemed slightly disappointed but thanked them for their time. Harold thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. 3 days later, a sleek black car pulled up to their farmhouse. A woman in a business suit stepped out holding a large envelope. Mr. and Mrs. Jensen? She asked when Harold met her on the porch. My name is Lisa Parker. I represent Marquis Luxury Goods. Harold stiffened. The store from Los Angeles. She nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. Yes, sir. May I come in? I have something important to discuss with you and your wife. Harold hesitated, then nodded curtly and showed her inside. Betty was in the kitchen and looked up in surprise as the unexpected visitor entered. Mrs. Jensen, Lisa said, extending her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you. Betty wiped her hands on her apron before shaking the offered hand. What can we do for you, Ms. Parker? Lisa placed the envelope on the kitchen table. First, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the treatment Mr. Jensen received at our Rodeo Drive location. What happened was completely unacceptable and goes against everything our company claims to stand for. Harold snorted softly. Betty shot him a look. I appreciate that, Betty said carefully. But that was months ago. Why are you here now? Lisa took a deep breath. The recent media attention has brought the incident to our CEO's attention. The manager involved has been let go, and we're implementing new training programs for all our staff. Well, good, Harold said. That fellow needed to find a new line of work, Lisa nodded. But that's not the only reason I'm here. She opened the envelope and pulled out an official-looking letter. We'd like to invite you both to be our guests of honor at the opening of our new Heritage Collection in Los Angeles. All expenses paid, of course. Harold and Betty exchanged confused looks. Heritage Collection? Betty asked. Yes, Lisa explained. It's a new line inspired by American craftsmanship and authenticity, the kind of quality and attention to detail that stands the test of time. She paused meaningfully. Like a 50-year marriage. Harold blinked in surprise. You're saying this new collection was inspired by us? In part, yes, Lisa admitted. Your story. The dedication to quality and authenticity, valuing things that last. It resonated with our design team. And frankly, it's also a way for us to publicly make amends. Betty looked thoughtful. So you want to use us to improve your image? Lisa had the grace to look embarrassed. I won't deny there's a PR element to this invitation. But the collection itself is genuine. We'd be honored if you'd consider it. Harold was about to refuse outright when Betty laid a hand on his arm. We'll think about it, she told Lisa. Thank you for coming all this way. After the woman left, Harold turned to Betty in disbelief. You're not seriously considering this? Betty shrugged. Why not? We've never been to Los Angeles together. It could be an adventure. The last adventure I had there didn't go so well, Harold pointed out. Until it did, Betty reminded him, a twinkle in her eye. Besides, I've never been wined and dined as an inspiration before. Might be fun to see how the other half lives. 3 weeks later, Harold found himself back in Los Angeles, this time with Betty by his side. The luxury store had arranged everything. First-class flights, a beautiful hotel suite, and a car service with a friendly driver who didn't seem to mind Harold's endless questions about the city. The store looked different somehow, warmer, less intimidating. Or maybe it was just having Betty with him, her hand firmly clasped in his, her new dress, bought specially for the trip, making her look 20 years younger. The CEO himself greeted them at the entrance, leading them to a place of honor near a display featuring the new collection. Harold was relieved to see there wasn't a trace of the old manager anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO announced to the gathered crowd of fashionable guests and press. I'd like to introduce our special guests tonight, Harold and Betty Jensen. Their remarkable 50-year partnership inspired key elements of our Heritage Collection, which celebrates the beauty of things that stand the test of time. Applause filled the room. Harold felt his ears grow hot with embarrassment, but Betty squeezed his hand and smiled up at him, clearly enjoying herself. The evening passed in a blur of introductions, photographs, and more champagne than Harold had consumed in his entire life. The new staff couldn't have been more different from his previous experience. Unfailingly polite, genuinely interested in their stories about farm life and their decades together. As they were preparing to leave, the CEO presented Betty with one of the new Heritage bags, a beautiful design that somehow managed to look both elegant and practical. With our compliments, he said, though I understand you already have one of our pieces. Betty smiled. I do. It was a very special gift from my husband. Later that night, back in their hotel room, Harold sat on the edge of the bed, loosening his tie with relief. Well, that was something, he said. He never thought I'd see the day when fancy folks in Los Angeles would be taking pictures with an old farmer from Idaho. Betty carefully placed her new bag next to the original one Harold had bought her. Life is full of surprises. 6 months ago, you were being shown the door of that store. Tonight, they treated us like royalty. Harold shook his head in wonder, all because of a chance meeting with Keanu Reeves. No, Betty corrected him gently. All because my stubborn husband wouldn't take no for an answer when he wanted to buy his wife a special gift. She sat beside him and took his weathered hand in hers. That's the real story here, Harold. Not the famous actor or the fancy store or the media attention. Just you, being the same good man you've always been for 50 years. Harold felt a lump form in his throat. You liked it, though? The party and all? Betty laughed. I did. But you know what I'll remember most about this trip? What's that? The look on your face when they brought out that tiny food on those huge plates. I thought you were going to ask if they were serving the real dinner next. They both dissolved into laughter, the kind of deep, comfortable laughter that only comes from decades of shared jokes and experiences. Outside their window, the lights of Los Angeles glittered like stars. It was a world away from their quiet farm in Idaho, but for tonight it was part of their story. Another chapter in a life that had seen its share of hardship and joy, ordinary days, and extraordinary moments. As Harold drifted off to sleep, beside the woman who had shared his life for half a century, he thought about what he'd told Keanu that day in the store, that Betty deserved beautiful things. Looking back now, he realized that the most beautiful things in their lives had never been objects at all, but moments like these. Unexpected adventures, shared laughter, and the quiet certainty of waking up beside each other, day after day, year after year. Some things, as it turned out, even money couldn't buy. And some people, no matter how they dressed or where they came from, carried a wealth that no luxury store could ever match.